Okay, now the time is 12 o'clock here in the Faroe Islands and 1 o'clock where you are in Sweden, Carolina and Pauline. So it's time to start this webinar. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Today we're going to get a presentation from Carolina Rodriguez and Pauline Rebouillat. Was it pronounced correctly?
Yes.
From Lund University about their project called Nature-Based Solutions at the Climate-Biodiversity-Health Nexus. And after the presentation, there will be room for some questions. So feel free to ask in the chat if you have some questions during the presentation. And before we start the presentation, I would like to inform you that this meeting is being recorded. So, Carolina and Pauline, this was all from me, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. So today we're going to present our project, which is called Nature-Based Solutions at the Climate-Biodiversity-Health Nexus. So it's a project conducted at Lund University and funded by the Agenda 2030 Excellence Program. So this project is still in progress, so we will present some results, but also the processes through we are going through with this interdisciplinary research. So this project is a multidisciplinary project which involves researchers from different faculties at Lund University. So we have the Center for Environmental and Climate Science and also the Department of Physical Geography. And then we have the Department of Clinical Sciences together with the Division of Occupational and Environmental Medicine. So this is the Faculty of Medicine, to which I belong. And finally, we have the Environmental Psychology Research Group, which is located at LTH in Lund. And so there's a third postdoc belonging to this group, but she could not participate today. So to summarize a bit the project, so in the current context, it's necessary to find some solutions to tackle the climate, biodiversity, and health crisis. So with this project, we aim to study the climate, biodiversity, health nexus. And more specifically, we look at how climate change modifies biodiversity and well-being relationships, but also how biodiversity can modify climate and well-being relationships. And finally, how well-being modifies climate and biodiversity relationships. And in the end, we want to look at how nature-based solutions can be integrated in this nexus. So just as a reminder, nature-based solutions are targeting different societal problems by using natural ecosystem processes and through management and restoration of nature. So what we are attempting to do with this project is to create a conceptual framework to clarify the endpoints, links, and modifiers in this nexus. We also want to synthesize the evidence on the linkages to uncover trade-offs and synergies to inform policy and management. And also, we would like to reveal unexpected consequences of the interactions between these elements in the nexus. So this develops itself in each of our disciplines. So for epidemiology, from which I am talking, we look at how human health can be affected by nature, and also at the mechanistic link between health and biodiversity. Then for the environmental psychology part, They look at how psychological well-being is affected by nature, and what the mechanistic link is between mental health and biodiversity. And finally, for ecology, it is how does biodiversity modify the climate impact of ecosystem-based approaches or nature-based solutions. So,
yeah, I will continue here after Pauline, just to put a little bit into the content where we are trying to look evidence for this nexus. So here is just a graph for the last 20 years, how many publications have been in the different connections. For example, we see that the more like pale color is showing how much has been done in between the relation of biodiversity and climate change, because there is a lot focus in climate change and we had kind of forgot the biodiversity part. And then also how this has been in line with different moments happening in the with the different institutions and reports coming out, like, for example, when it was created, the IPCC already in the 80s, and also the development of the ecosystem services approach, that also that comes or brings in the 2018 the first mention of nature-based solutions. And then going in the same history line, we are also seeing the different components bringing like the economic and social and environmental aspects, but also the development of the SDGs. And also we see here that in the 2016 is the first position on paper of the ULCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature. And then we are basing kind of our project based on the IPBES Global Assessment Report, where they are showing a lot the potential of nature-based solutions to cover all the different societal challenges. And then the idea here was also to see, for example, the relation between also climate and human relationship. That you see it, the other highest bar, but how little has been done also in the relation of biodiversity, human, or also the whole nexus, because we see very little connection on all these three components of the nexus. And that's the human part comes into place after the pandemic with the One Health. And of course, we see what is going to happen in the future with the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Just to put a little bit on the context with the evidence we have. So I want to bring a little bit this with the dual goals of nature-based solution for both climate mitigation and biodiversity conservation, because there has been a lot of focus on the carbon sequestration part, and it's because there is much more easier to kind of develop assessment on how we can measure, for example, carbon sequestration, that the multidimensional of biodiversity. And I'm going to talk more about that in the next slide. And that also brings different trade-offs between mitigation and biodiversity conservation, because we will not see the same, for example, design or implementation of nature-based solutions, because we are going to have challenges in how we measure biodiversity, and because also biodiversity is quite complex. So in our project, we are trying to see or not define, because biodiversity is already defined, and it covers everything in life on the earth in different levels, organizational levels. We have a very multifaceted, but also multi-scale and multi-trophic diversity. And that's been everything from genetic species richness, but also the ecosystem diversity. And like I mentioned before, there has been a lot of challenge on how we measure the biodiversity, because we have different metrics, and perhaps all those metrics doesn't align in a one or in just one big component. And even though there has been advancement in biodiversity monitoring, like GIS, genetic DNA metrics, and also satellite sensors to measure all the vegetation cover. Still, the need of integration and other type of approaches, like more citizenship science, and also different ways of how people perceive the biodiversity. So Pauline will be explaining also the next slide, that it will be more about that.
So when we move to fields that are outside of ecology and environmental science, the perspective on biodiversity is very different. And in fact, it's very rare that biodiversity is directly measured. So in fact, it's often contact with biodiversity which is approached. So one interesting framework on this topic is the framework by Marcel from 2021. So and in this framework, they divide the contact with biodiversity in exposure and experience. So on one side, we have the exposure, which is the one person's amount of contact with biodiversity, considering different aspects like frequency, duration, or estimating the opportunities. And on the other side, we have experience, which is how a person experiences and interacts with biodiversity. And this includes both physical proximity and also the nature of interaction. So now that we have talked a bit about biodiversity, we will look at the nexus through different angles, so the different perspectives from our disciplines. So firstly, we have the perspective from environmental psychology. So our colleague who is a postdoc in this discipline is not here today. So just briefly, the question when looking from this perspective is, how are people's eco emotions related to their connection to nature? So she is planning to work on a conceptual framework on this topic, and also has different empirical studies looking mostly at nature connectedness. So then for the part looking from epidemiology, so our general question from this perspective is how human health is affected by nature. So of course it's put in very simple terms here, and also what are the mechanisms involved. So we have several ongoing projects focusing on human health and mostly on physical health, leaving the mental health for the psychology perspective. So firstly, there is a review. We're planning to do a review aiming to synthesize the evidence on the mechanisms linking nature-based solutions to physical health. So this is in progress. And there are also some empirical studies that I'm conducting now. So we are using large population data sets, linking different perceptions of the outdoor living environment to health outcomes. So firstly, I have worked on overweight and obesity that I will detail in the next slide. And then I'm planning to work on, on cardiovascular disease in the Malmö Diet and Cancer Study. So I'm going to present briefly some results from this first study on overweight and obesity. So the aims of this work were firstly to identify body mass index trajectories in a dataset which is the Scania Public Health Cohort, which was started in 2000. Then we wanted to characterize these different body mass index trajectories in terms of social demographics, lifestyle, health, and also the outdoor environment. And finally, we wanted to study the associations between BMI trajectories and the green qualities of the environment. So for that, we used data from the Scania public health cohort, which started in 2000 in southern Sweden. So there were about 13,000 participants included at baseline. They were 18 to 80 years old. So they answered questions about social demographic characteristics, lifestyle, and health. And these information were collected through 4 surveys that went on from 2000 to 2016. And to achieve our aims, we matched to this Scania public health cohort an outdoor environment database, which is called SCOUT. So we were able to match these two on the geographical coordinates of where the participants were living. And so from this environmental database, we used 3 dimensions or perceptions, which are related to greenery. And with that, we computed the Scania Green Score that we then linked to these different body mass index trajectories, and then used a regression to study the associations. So now we have a few results from this study, so still preliminary. So we modeled 5 trajectories separately in men and women that you can see on the graphs on the right. So what we can summarize from these from this study is that there was a general increasing trend in body mass index in this sample. We found 2 large groups, both in men and women, who had relatively stable BMI. So in the normal BMI or overweight BMI range. And then we also had 3 other groups which showed more complex evolution and which were in the obesity range. So what we observed was that the trajectories which were in the obese range were associated with less favorable socio-economic and lifestyle factors. But when we tried to link these trajectories with the Scania Green Score that we had calculated, we didn't find any consistent associations. So to conclude, we think that, so we didn't find significant findings here, but we think that probably we need more complex methods, because studying overweight and obesity over time is very complex, and there are many other factors than environmental ones that are involved. So we think that more studies are needed to better understand the underlying mechanisms linking the environment to health. So then we would like to explore other health outcomes, such as cardiovascular disease, and this is work in progress. So now I will let Carolina continue looking from the ecological perspective.
Just before to continue, is because we have started the project in different times. So Pauline has already go through some time with the project and just starting. So my work is still more focused right now in a conceptual framework. And the idea is that we want to kind of understand this mechanistic role of biodiversity, especially how we can use it as a potential for nature-based solution for climate mitigation and biodiversity conservation. And then when I talk about climate mitigation, I'm more focused about carbon sequestration and carbon storage in time. So just to start looking at the role of biodiversity, we see that nature-based solutions has very components like the type, structure, and context. And in that case, I'm talking about types referring to the different solutions or interventions we have right now, like reforestation, green spaces, sustainable agriculture. And structure is more focused on the composition or the age structure, on a spatial arrangement of the natural-based solutions, and the context, more like the different environmental and can be also socio-economic, so cultural settings. So we see that we have two mechanisms here, and then one role of biodiversity is like the role of moderator, and that will decide, for example, what type of solution I would like to implement in the case of climate mitigation for carbon sequestration and storage, but also which type of functional biodiversity will boost this functionality. And then in the case of co-benefit, what type of biodiversity I will need to also help in the conservation targets. In that case, I will look more into what kind of identify what type of solution not only address climate change, but also support these targets, like with threatened species or key species, endemic species. So now we have been moving for this from the role of biodiversity and trying to use ecological principles to kind of understand those mechanisms. So we have kind of using different conceptual frameworks to develop our conceptual framework based on the biodiversity functionality. And we know that biodiversity already is multidimensional. And that in this case, carbon sequestration is kind of led by the type of biodiversity we use. And if we want to sequester more carbon, that means that we will have more biomass. And that's why I bring the relation of diversity productivity, and that it depends on what type of biodiversity we implement. It will increase or decrease the carbon sequestration. And then we will also need some resilient mechanisms that can help for the carbon storage in time, and also to help with the conservation. However, also we have some other influential factors that may drive these different relationships, and then we will have perhaps the scale and legacy effects and the heterogeneity of environmental conditions, but also the disturbance regimes that will also help this relationship and help to boost synergies or reduce trade-offs. And the idea is that we understand all these roles, those mechanisms, and the outcomes we want for the nature-based solution. Bringing back to the synergies and trade-off, like I say, depending on the scale, this will be critical for preserving habitat for diversity, but also when we come to the carbon sequestration, it's already a trade-off, because most of the cases, the scale will be in order to maximize biomass, and most of the cases is done in a very limited areas. When it comes to the legacy effects, that will be very important especially for the ecological stage and the process, but perhaps that will not bring or maybe overlook in favor to immediate carbon capture strategies. And we know that when we prioritize diverse conditions to support a wide range of species and ecosystems, perhaps the target areas for high productivity are the potential at the cost of biodiversity. And that's why we want to see all these elements. and in the case also disturbances that may be very important for regeneration of biodiversity, but at the same time, when we come to the carbon sequestration, may distort this carbon storage. So that will be important to look when we look into the conceptual framework of what is needed and why it's important to highlight the biodiversity in these solutions. I have been doing a very rapid screen or review of what is already in the literature about relationships between climate mitigation and biodiversity conservation. I have been looking in some reviews about mixed forests as an example for a natural-based solution. And I have been trying to see if there is any connection with the different components that we have in the conceptual framework. And I have seen that there is a lot of focus mainly in the productivity part, focus in biomass, carbon sequestration, very little in regards of conservation targets, and I had seen very little the ecological principles reflected in the literature about, for example, the relation of diversity, productivity with complementarity, very little about selection effects. And when it comes to resilience, the relation between diversity and resilience is mainly functional diversity that has been highlighted in this evidence or in these reviews. And just only talking about very few factors affecting these relationships, and that it's mainly about the scale and very little in disturbance regimes. So that is a good insight that perhaps we need to look into more individual studies to see if we can capture perhaps different biodiversity metrics that can help us to see what type of biodiversity we'll need for the different solutions that needs to be implemented, and of course, based on the different contexts and factors that can affect this relationship, that will be really important. So this is still in progress, and I'm going into this different screening of different papers to see all these connections. Pauline will continue with some outcomes that we have been doing through this process of the project.
So the project is not finished, it's still ongoing, but already we have several outcomes. Firstly, we had the opportunity with Marlis, who's not here today, to develop an interdisciplinary PhD course at Lund University, which is completely related to our project. And in which several members of the project gave lectures. So the students were from very diverse backgrounds, and you can see all their research fields on the picture on the left. Otherwise, we are also writing together, the three postdocs, an interdisciplinary perspective article on evaluating the role of biodiversity in this nexus. Then there are several articles which are in progress in our different disciplines. And finally, we are also members of the Nature-Based Future Solutions profile area, which is a network at Lund University. So with this interdisciplinary project, we have learned, and we are still learning a lot about how to do interdisciplinary research. So in this type of project, where there are different disciplines involved, there can be conflicting values between disciplines, and of course it's a challenge to handle that. So there is a lot of time which is needed to find common ground and also to find a common language to communicate and and use to have new research ideas. And there was also a question that comes very often, probably because of this interdisciplinary characteristic. It's the importance of scale and the importance of defining at which scale we are talking. So I will let Carolina go with the take-home messages.
So far, we have seen that there is a lack of evidence for some part of the nexus. We have some papers more focused on certain areas. Climate change is the main area that has been researched, while other parts of the nexus still missing, or it's also difficult to see the interpretation of what is meant when we talk about biodiversity, what type of biodiversity is greenness means also biodiversity, and there is that missing part. That comes in line with the second take-home message about less attention given to biodiversity and the complexity. And one of the reasons is the complexity of how we measure biodiversity or how we perceive the role of biodiversity. There is a need for common metrics because there is a lot of different kind of metrics. Perhaps in ecology part, we rely a lot in species richness, but we already seen some papers coming recently that we may need other type of biodiversity, like more functional, like functional diversity or genetic diversity, or in the case of social science, we need also some other metrics that can be integrated in one assignment. And of course, the integration of interdisciplinary approaches, because like Pauline was explaining, it's not easy to come with a common ground of for what is mean biodiversity, for example, in the case of social studies, and how those perceptions with feelings can also help, or other type of understanding in different, for example, just language and words. For example, if I talk about regulation for me will be climate, in the social science perhaps will be more like law policy making. So all this kind of common ground in interdisciplinarity. I just want to finish our presentation because we will also organize a panel discussion here under the Sustainability Week, where we also bring in the nature-based solutions and how they can tackle all these societal challenges with climate, biodiversity loss, and health. So we are not sure yet if this will be recorded or this will be available for online, but perhaps we can keep informed the network if there is some interest. Already we have confirmed people from, for example, the municipality here in Lund to explain how they are integrating nature-based solutions in the municipality scale, but also expertise from different areas like ecology and environmental psychology, and also the region, to see how easy or how challenging is implementing this solution. In that way, I just want to thank you, all of you, for listening, and also Fiona for inviting us for this webinar. And this project, like Pauline was saying, is financed by the university, excellent program, and of course, time for some questions.
Thank you very much, Carolina and Pauline. And yeah, feel free to ask questions in the chat if you have some. There must be some questions to this very interesting presentation. I can start, maybe. So you mentioned that there is a need for a common framework. And in our work with nature-based solutions, the program in the Nordics, we found that there's a big difference between how nature-based solutions are defined. Has this been a big challenge in your work?
Well, in the first stages of the project, we talked a lot about these different definitions. For example, the definition from the EU Commission compared to the definition from IUCN. So depending on the discipline, it's sometimes easier to relate to one or to the other. And for my more like in my field, it seems that it's more the one from the EU Commission which is used. But sometimes in other fields it's more common to use the one from IUCN. So, but they are very different, and of course we need to acknowledge that.
Yeah, I think that the problem with the definition is that they also give a space to interpret the solution in many different ways, and that's why perhaps can be problematic, because any solution nowadays is a nature-based solution. And perhaps it's not very clear, perhaps the goals or the objectives you have with the specific solution, because like I was talking, it will depend a lot on the context where that solution is implemented. And that's why perhaps this definition that can be very broad doesn't really help as a tool to kind of the implementation part.
Thank you. So we haven't got any questions yet, but I'll send you a link in the chat to the NetworkNature Nordic Hub, where you can sign up as members if you haven't done it already. And then you'll get information on our next webinars, conferences, and so on. And then I can, at the 26th and the 27th of September, we will be arranging a conference in Malmö on nature-based solutions in the Nordics. So you can save the date in your calendar, and there will be some more information probably next week, hopefully. So there's a raised hand. I think Christian, can you maybe write the question in the chat? I don't think I can allow you to say something. Or can I? Can you say something now?
Yes.
Perfect. I found out.
Now we can turn on the camera as well. So it was just as a follow-up to the discussion on the lack of clear definitions. So we just wanted to say that at least from DTU's point in Denmark, we have just started a new EU Horizon project where dealing with that problem is one of the major things, albeit from a marine and coastal point of view. We're trying to see where the risks are for greenwashing and, well, poor impacts, and trying to set up some minimum criteria for implementation of nature-based solutions. And over the next year, we will do a number of stakeholder interviews and some workshops as well, in addition to some literature review, to see what the options are for supporting implementation with integrity throughout the process, from planning to potentially even decommissioning of different types of nature-based solutions. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that, do you know anywhere where we could team up with some of you to ask for input? Because based on this presentation, I think some of you might have some very good ideas for what we should look after in this type of projects. Or maybe the event in Malmö might be relevant to have a small workshop. I'm not sure, we haven't interacted with this Nordic node before.
Thank you for your question. I'll pass it on to you, Carolina and Pauline, to start.
Well, we are kind of also new in the network, and that is what we are trying to do, to like how we can connect, because I think that nature-based solutions are boosting very fast, and also in a lot of decision making, especially in municipalities, and as a kind of gray idea, but it's still, like you say, there is not so much space in the framework of how you have tools for what criteria you need for implementation. I mean, what kind of solutions should be placed in a specific place, even though there is a lot of networks now around the world about this and collection of this information. But I think that the platform for that conference can be really relevant. But of course, you also want to contact us and exchange emails, and then perhaps we can keep open inputs and things that come out from what we're doing.
Thank you very much. The whole purpose with this NetworkNature Nordic Hub is to gather people who work with the same subject, to share contacts and knowledge. So you can also send me an email, and I will pass it on to the other members of the hub, and then we can connect some people working with same similar projects.
Yeah, that'll be great. Thank you.
And you got a question in the chat, Christian. I don't know if you saw that, but you can see it there. Yeah. And then Anki writes here that there are guidelines on nature-based solutions from both CBD as well as the IUCN on definition and how to implement and safeguards. So you use that as a ground for discussion.
Yeah, we're very much aware.
Perfect. Thank you. Are there any further questions? You can raise your hand also, or write a question in the chat.
We are also happy to answer questions by email if you don't have time, or if you cannot take it now. So feel free to.
All right. I don't think there are any further questions right now. So do you have anything you would like to add before we say thank you for today, Caroline and Pauline?
I think we have said, I think we have said what we wanted, and so if there are people from Lund, feel free to come to the panel discussion or to contact us for any other thoughts.
Thank you very much. Our next NetworkNature Nordic Hub webinar will be the 29th of April, and you will get an email on that as well if you're part of the NetworkNature Nordic Hub. So thank you very much for today. And as I started to say, this webinar has been recorded, so it's possible to see watch it afterwards on our NetworkNature Nordic Hub website. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you.
Thank you for the interest.